Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku was selected as a god's champion in a divine war? Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The world was painted in shades of gray and orange. Gray from the pulverized concrete that hung in the air like a suffocating shroud, a constant gritty reminder of the city's wounds. Orange from the fires that still licked at the skeletal husks of office buildings, casting long, dancing shadows that played tricks on the eyes. The air tasted of ash, ozone, and something metallic and cloying that could only be blood. For Izuku Midoriya, this landscape of ruin had become distressingly familiar. The paranormal liberation war had ended, but the battle for Japan's soul was a festering wound that refused to close. Villains, emboldened by the chaos and the cracks in Hero Society's foundation, crawled from the woodwork like termites. They weren't grand ideologues like Shigaraki or Stain. They were predators, jackals feasting on the carcass of a crippled society. Today's jackal called himself Gravemaw. The name was Apartment. He was a mountain of scarred flesh and knotted muscle, his quirk a horrifyingly effective form of kinetic absorption. Every blow he took, every piece of debris that struck him, only seemed to make him stronger. The energy was stored in the grotesque, tumor-like growths that dotted his body, then unleashed in devastating shockwaves that could flatten a city block. "Is that all you've got, little hero?" The giant bellowed, his voice a gravelly avalanche. He backhanded a slab of fallen roadway, sending it spinning toward a still smoldering storefront where a handful of other heroes were trying to coordinate an evacuation. "Fagum, look out!" Deku's voice was a ragged tear in the cacophony. Green lightning, no longer a smooth, controlled torrent but a frantic, spitting arc, exploded around him. 45%, his mind screamed, the number a mantra of pain and control. The vestiges of One for All were a frantic chorus in his soul, urging him on, lending him their strength, but his body was the final arbiter of what he could handle. And his body was screaming its dissent. His costume, the Gamma version he treasured, was in tatters. The right side of his cowl was torn away, and a deep gash over his eye wept a steady stream of red, blurring his vision. His iron-soled boots were dented and scraped, and the support braces on his arms felt less like aids and more like tourniquets on limbs that were already past their breaking point. He launched himself from a shattered lamppost, a verdant comet against the gray sky. Air force was his only option. Direct contact was suicide. He kicked, sending compressed blasts of air at Gravemaw, aiming for his joints, his head, anywhere that might be a weak point. Gravemaw just laughed, soaking up the impacts like a sponge. "Tickles!" he roared. The tumors on his shoulders pulsed with a sickening orange light. Deku landed, stumbling as his right knee buckled. A hairline fracture from an earlier impact was protesting the abuse. He ignored it. He had to. The pro-heroes on the scene, Fat Gum, Rocklock, and a handful of others, were doing their best to handle crowd control and mitigate damage, but Gravemaw was a singular problem. A problem that required singular power. A problem that fell to him. "Stay back!" he yelled, waving the other heroes away as they tried to advance. "His shockwaves are too wide. Get the civilians clear! Deku, you can't fight him alone!" Rocklock shouted, his voice tight with strain as he used his quirk to lock a crumbling overpass in place. "Just for a little longer!" Deku gasped, forcing a grin that felt like it was splitting his face open. The All Might smile. It felt heavier than ever. He saw it out of the corner of his blurred vision. A flicker of movement in the ruins of a collapsed department store, not 50 meters from where Gravemaw stood gloating. It wasn't a hero. It wasn't a villain. It was a woman, clutching two small children to her chest, their faces pale with dust and terror. They were trapped behind a cage of fallen steel rebar and concrete, hidden from Gravemaw's sight but directly in the path of his inevitable rampage. A cold dread, colder than any injury, sluiced through him. They hadn't been evacuated. They were missed. Time seemed to warp, the seconds stretching into agonizing eternities. Gravemaw's attention shifted. His cruel, piggish eyes scanned the destruction he had wrought, and for a horrifying moment, they locked onto the same pocket of ruin Deku was staring at. A predator's smile split his face. "Ooh, what have we here?" he grunted, taking a thunderous step that shook the very ground. Forgot some little morsels. No. The word was a silent bomb in Deku's mind. No, you don't. The chorus of the vestiges swelled. Now, ninth! Yoichi Shigaraki's voice was a whisper of power. Unleash it! Right! Deku breathed, sinking into a low stance. The green lightning intensified, crackling with an almost white-hot fury. The air pressure dropped. Pebbles and dust lifted from the ground, swirling around his feet. The pain in his body was a distant fire alarm, a warning he had no choice but to ignore. 50%. The muscles in his legs screamed. 52. The fracture in his knee sent a spike of white-hot agony up his spine. 55%. He exploded forward. He wasn't a comet anymore. He was a meteor, a force of nature aimed at another. He couldn't use a full power smash. The kinetic feedback into Grave Maw would be catastrophic. The resulting shockwave would obliterate the department store and the family inside. He had to be precise. He had to be fast. He had to dislodge the villain, to throw him off balance, to give the others an opening. He closed the distance in a blink. Grave Maw was still turning, a cruel sneer on his face, as Deku's right arm came up. He didn't clench his fist. A full punch was too much. A flick. A Delaware smash. Focused. Controlled. Delaware smash! Air Force! The blast of compressed air was not a shotgun. It was a rifle slug. It struck Grave Maw square in the temple. The giant's head snapped to the side with a sickening crack, his body stumbling sideways, away from the trapped family. His stored energy, not yet at critical mass, fizzled out in a harmless wave of light. It worked. The cost, however, was immediate and absolute. A sound like a bundle of dry sticks being snapped echoed in the sudden quiet, a sound only Deku could truly hear and feel. He looked down at his right arm, the limb that had delivered the blow. It was ruined. From the elbow down, it was a mangled wreck. The bones had not just broken, they had shattered. Splinters of ulna and radius were pressing against the skin from the inside, creating grotesque, sharp angles. The arm hung limp and useless, a dead weight of flesh and fabric. A wave of nausea and blinding, world-ending pain crashed over him, and for the first time in the fight, a cry of pure agony was torn from his throat. He collapsed to one knee, cradling the destroyed limb to his chest, his vision swimming with black spots. He could feel the vestiges recoiling in a phantom agony of their own. Too much, Nana Shimura's voice echoed, filled with sorrow. You pushed too hard, my boy. Grave Maw, however, was not down for the count. He shook his head, a low growl rumbling in his chest. He was disoriented, concussed, but very much alive. He righted himself, his gaze falling upon the now exposed family. You little pest! He snarled, ignoring Deku. His focus was on the easier prey. He raised a massive, car-sized foot. Deku watched, his heart hammering against his ribs. The world shifted into a horrifyingly clear, slow-motion tableau. He saw the mother's eyes widen in final, accepting terror. He saw her pull her children tighter, turning her own body into a futile shield. He saw the shadow of Grave Maw's foot begin to fall. He tried to move, his body refused. His legs were spent. His left arm was trembling too hard to even push himself up. His right arm was a monument to his failure. One for all flickered around him, a dying ember. He had nothing left. The other heroes were shouting his name, their voices sounding like they were coming from miles away. They were too far. They wouldn't make it. He was going to watch them die. He, Izuku Midoriya, inheritor of One for All, the power meant to save everyone, was going to lie here broken and useless, and watch a family be crushed into oblivion. The irony was so bitter, so acidic, it burned worse than any injury. He had saved them from the first threat, only to deliver them to the second. His intervention had been their death sentence. All his training. All his promises to All Might. All the sacrifices of the vestiges who lived within him. All for this. To fail at the most critical moment. The despair that flooded him was unlike anything he had ever known. It was not the despair of a boy who was told he couldn't be a hero. It was not the despair of facing an unbeatable foe. It was the profound, absolute, and soul-crushing despair of a protector who could not protect. It was a failure of his very being, a refutation of his one, single purpose in life. I just want to save them. The thought wasn't a thought. It was a scream from the deepest, most primal part of his soul. It was a prayer, though he addressed it to no one. It was a desperate, hopeless plea cast out into the void. I don't care about the pain. I don't care what it costs. I don't need to win. I just need them to be safe. Please, anyone. The sound of crumbling concrete did not stop, but it faded. The acrid smell of smoke and ash receded, replaced by something clean and ancient, like the air after a thunderstorm in an old-growth forest. The agonizing fire in his arm and the dull throbbing that encompassed his entire body did not vanish, but they were distant, muted, as if happening to someone else. A warmth, gentle as a summer sunrise, bloomed in the center of his chest. It spread through his limbs, not healing the pain but cocooning him from it. Golden light, soft and ethereal, bled into the edges of his vision, washing out the gray and orange of the ruined world. He was no longer kneeling on shattered asphalt. He was standing in the familiar, infinite darkness of the vestige world. The chairs were there, arranged in their silent circle. The star-like embers of past quirks drifted in the void. The figures of the previous users of One for All were there, too, but they were not looking at him. They were all turned, their attention fixed on a new presence. In the center of the circle, where only he, the ninth, had ever stood, was a new figure. It was not a man. It was a being of light. It possessed a humanoid shape, tall and serene, but it had no distinct features. It was woven from pure, soft gold light, a living effigy of dawn. The light did not glare or burn, it soothed. It pulsed with a gentle, rhythmic beat, like a cosmic heart. An aura of profound peace, of unshakable safety, radiated from it, so potent that it quieted the frantic energy of One for All into a respectful hum. The vestiges were in awe. Yoichi Shigaraki, the first, stood slightly, his form wavering with curiosity and disbelief. Nana Shimura had a hand over her mouth, her eyes wide. Even the second and third, usually so stoic and grim, seemed to be observing with rapt attention. Then, the being spoke. Its voice was not a sound that entered his ears. It was a resonance that vibrated directly in his soul, a melody of ancient comfort and weary strength. You prayed. Deku blinked, his mind struggling to catch up with the sensory overload. I did. All mortals do, in their own way. They pray for victory. For vengeance. For wealth. For love. But your prayer, yours was different. It was pure. Unburdened by ego or desire. The golden being drifted closer, and Deku felt no fear, only a strange sense of homecoming. You did not pray for strength to crush your enemy. You did not pray for your own survival. In a moment of ultimate despair, with your body broken and your power spent, you prayed only for the safety of others. You prayed to be a shield. What are you? Deku asked, his voice a whisper in the silent expanse. I am the echo of the first shield raised against the dark. I am the memory of the first selfless act. I am the concept that gives mortals the strength to stand before that which would devour them, and say no further. The light pulsed gently. I am protection. I am heroism. Over the millennia, your kind has given me many names. The one that has endured the longest is Presidium, a god. The thought should have been terrifying, unbelievable. But here, in this impossible space, it felt right. It was the only explanation that made sense of the sheer, overwhelming presence before him. A god? Deku breathed out. But why are you here? Why are you talking to me? Presidium's form seemed to sigh, a wave of weariness rippling through its light. Because there is a war. Not a war of flesh and steel, such as you are accustomed to, but a war of concepts, a war of existence versus non-existence. A new feeling pricked at Deku's consciousness, a chill that had nothing to do with the cold of the void. It was a sliver of true, existential dread. My opposite, my eternal adversary is Nihil. The god of annihilation. The void. The silence at the end of all things. Where I represent the will to preserve, Nihil represents the inexorable pull of entropy. The belief that all things should, and must, end. Deku's mind raced, trying to process the scale of what he was being told. A war between gods. But what does that have to do with With what's happening on Earth, everything. The god's voice grew grave. Long ago, our conflicts would shake the foundations of reality. Our direct battle would unmake creation itself. An accord was struck. We can no longer interfere directly, so we choose champions. Mortals who embody our principles, to act as our will in the physical realm. Nihil's influence seeps into your world, creating aberrations, threats born of fear and chaos that feed its power. It seeks a champion of its own, one who will gleefully unravel the tapestry of your world. The image of the trapped family flashed in Deku's mind. The falling shadow of Gravema's foot. The absolute certainty of their deaths. You need a champion, Deku stated, the pieces clicking into place with dreadful clarity. You need someone to fight for you. I need a hero, Presidium corrected gently. I have grown weak, Izuku Midoriya. Your world has changed. The concept of true, selfless heroism has faded. It has been commercialized, rank diluted. My power wanes with it. Nihil, however, feeds on the growing despair, the chaos you now see every day. It grows stronger. I have searched for centuries for a soul that burned with the pure, unadulterated fire of a protector. And then I heard your prayer. A pinprick of brilliant, defiant light in a world succumbing to shadow. The god of heroes was dying. The thought was staggering. A world without the concept of protection. It would be a world ruled by predators. A world that would devour itself. Presidium drifted until it was directly before him. The golden light was warm on his face. I cannot offer you victory. I cannot promise you an easy path. The burden I offer is immense. The enemies you will face are terrors ripped from myth and nightmare. You will carry a weight that no mortal was ever meant to bear. You will be forced to stand alone against the tide of oblivion. The light of the being seemed to focus, to intensify. For the first time, Deku felt the sheer, crushing pressure of a divine will. It wasn't a command. It was a plea. But I can give you the power to fulfill your prayer. I can give you the strength to be the shield you have always yearned to be. The power to protect everyone. The words hung in the void, shimmering with potential and consequence. The power to protect everyone. It wasn't just his dream. It was the answer to his deepest, most fundamental failing. It was the solution to the scene he had just fled, the image of the family about to be crushed. Was there even a choice? For him? He thought of All Might, entrusting him with one for all, with his legacy. He thought of his mother, crying in the hospital room, but still supporting his dream. He thought of Uraraka, Ida, Todoroki, Bakugo, all of them, fighting, striving, believing in him. He thought of every person he had ever saved, and every person he had failed to reach in time. To turn this down would be to deny his own soul. He met the formless gaze of the god of heroes and felt no hesitation. His own fear, his own pain, his own survival, they were irrelevant. They had always been. My whole life, Deku began, his voice surprisingly steady, filled with a conviction that came from the very core of his being. My whole life, I've only ever wanted one thing. To save people, to be a hero who saves everyone with a smile, so they don't have to be afraid anymore. If this power, if being your champion, gives me the chance to do that, to keep that promise. He took a deep breath, the air of this divine space filling him with a strange resolve. Then yes, he said, his voice ringing with finality. I accept. A wave of what could only be described as divine relief washed over him from Presidium. The golden light flared, bright as a newborn star, but still gentle, still warm. So be it. Rise, Izuku Midoriya. Rise as my aegis. My final hope. Presidium extended a hand of pure light. It did not touch Deku's chest, where the ember of one for all resided. It reached instead for the source of his current pain, his most recent failure. It reached for his shattered right arm. The moment the light made contact, Deku's consciousness was split. He was still in the void, but he was also back in his body, kneeling on the asphalt. He could feel the divine energy pouring into him. Not with the chaotic fury of one for all, but with the steady, inexorable force of a rising tide. It focused on his ruined arm. The pain did not just vanish. It was unwritten. He could feel, on a microscopic level, the splintered fragments of bone dissolving into dust, and then reforming. The sharp edges smoothed out. The compound fractures knitted together, stronger than before. Torn muscle fibers weaved themselves back into a perfect whole. Severed nerves reconnected, sending sparks of pleasant warmth instead of agony up to his brain. The skin, moments ago stretched taut over broken bone, sealed itself without a scar. As the healing was completed, the golden light began to solidify. It wasn't flesh, but something more. It cooled and hardened, flowing over his hand, his wrist, his forearm, forming a piece of armor that seemed both impossibly ancient and flawlessly futuristic. It was a gauntlet, a vambrace of exquisite design. The base color was a deep, forest green, the color of his own lightning, but it was filigreed with shimmering gold patterns. The lines were not random. They swirled and coalesced into intricate symbols. One line traced the shape of a shield. Another traced what looked like a cardiogram of a strong, steady heartbeat. The armor fit over his tattered costume sleeve perfectly, humming with a quiet, contained power that resonated with One for All. It felt impossibly light, yet more indestructible than any material he had ever encountered. This, he knew instinctively, was the vambrace of fortitude. In the vestige world, Presidium's light dimmed slightly, as if the act had costed a great deal of energy. This is the first piece of the aegis of the Protector, the god's voice explained, now tinged with a deeper weariness. It will shield you from the backlash of your own power, allowing you to wield the gift of your predecessors without destroying yourself. It is a conduit, a focus. More will manifest as you prove your resolve and embody the virtues of a true protector: courage, sacrifice, and hope. Now go. Your first act as my champion awaits. The golden light of the divine realm folded in on itself. The silent figures of the vestiges faded. The voice of Presidium became a distant echo. The world came rushing back in a deafening, disorienting roar. The first thing he registered was the insistent, high-pitched beeping of a heart monitor. The second was the sterile, antiseptic smell that always clung to hospitals and sick rooms. He was lying on his back, on something soft but firm. A bed. Deku's eyes fluttered open. The ceiling was white. Acoustic tiles. A fluorescent light fixture hummed above him. He turned his head, a dull ache still present in his neck. He was in a private room. An four stand was next to his bed, a clear bag of saline dripping a slow, steady rhythm into his left arm. He pushed himself up, his mind a whirlwind of confusion. The fight. Grave Maw. The family. The prayer. Presidium. Was it real? Was it just a hallucination? A dream brought on by trauma and blood loss? Then he saw his right arm. It was resting on top of the thin white blanket, and it was covered by the vambrace of fortitude. It was real. The gauntlet was even more detailed in the harsh hospital light. The golden filigree seemed to capture and hold the light, giving it a divine luminescence. It was completely seamless, fitting his arm as if it had been forged there. He tentatively flexed his fingers. There was no pain. None. He clenched his fist, the movement smooth and powerful. He could feel One for All thrumming beneath his skin, a familiar, restless energy. But it was different now. The chaotic, self-destructive edge was gone, smoothed out, as if filtered through the gauntlet. The power felt stable. Sane. He swung his legs over the side of the bed, his bare feet touching the cool linoleum floor. He felt exhausted, drained to his very soul, but his body was whole. Intact. The door to his room slid open with a soft hiss. A doctor in a white coat and a nurse holding a datapad stepped inside, their expressions tired but professional. They stopped dead when they saw him sitting up. "Midoriya! You're awake!" the doctor said, his surprise evident. You shouldn't be. We had to sedate you heavily." The nurse's eyes were wide, fixed on his right arm. "Doctor, look!" The doctor's gaze followed hers, and his jaw went slack. He took a step closer, his eyes darting between Deku's arm and the chart on the nurse's datapad. "Impossible. What is it?" Deku asked, his voice hoarse. "Your arm," the doctor said, sounding utterly bewildered. "When they brought you in, it was pulp. The paramedics' reports, the initial X-rays, we have them right here. Compound fractures of the ulna and radius, multiple shattered metacarpals. It was one of the worst breaks I've ever seen." We were scheduling you for emergency reconstructive surgery. He looked at the perfectly formed armored arm. But that's not possible. And that thing, the nurse added, pointing with a trembling finger. The gauntlet. It wasn't there when he was admitted. And we tried to scan it. X-rays, MRIs, they pass right through it, like it's not even there. We couldn't remove it. Deku looked down at the vambrace, then back at the baffled medical staff. What could he possibly say? Oh, this? It's a divine artifact gifted to me by the fading god of heroism after I became his champion in a cosmic war against the god of annihilation. They'd transfer him to a psychiatric ward. Before he could formulate a lie, the door slid open again, this time with much more force. Tashinori Yagi, in his skeletal, deflated form, practically stumbled into the room, his face a mask of frantic worry. His oversized shirt hung loosely on his frame, and his eyes were wide and sunken. Young Midoriya! I came as soon as I heard. He stopped, his words catching in his throat as he took in the scene. He saw Deku, sitting on the edge of the bed, not broken and bleeding, but whole. And then he saw the gauntlet. All Might, the man who had faced down armies and world-ending threats, stared at the vambrace of fortitude. He, more than anyone, knew the nature of One for All. He knew its power, its history, its feel, and the energy radiating from that gauntlet, a quiet, ancient power that harmonized with One for All but was distinctly other, was something he had never encountered. It was serene, powerful, and utterly alien. The doctor and nurse, sensing a shift in the atmosphere, quietly excused themselves, leaving mentor and student alone in the sterile white room. Tashinori took a hesitant step forward, his blue eyes fixed on the golden-green armor. He looked from the gauntlet to Deku's face, seeing the exhaustion and confusion warring with a new, terrifying resolve. The air crackled with unspoken questions. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. Finally, All Might found his voice. It was barely a whisper, laden with a father's fear and a mentor's profound concern. My boy, what have you done? Tashinori Yagi's question hung in the sterile air of the hospital room, heavier than any physical weight. My boy, what have you done? It wasn't an accusation. It was a plea, steeped in a fear so profound it made his skeletal form seem even more fragile. He saw not just a healed student, but a fundamental alteration, a variable introduced into an equation he had spent his life trying to solve. Izuku Midoriya's mind raced, a frantic scramble for a plausible lie. The truth was a wild, impossible beast, a creature of myth and starlight that had no place in this world of concrete and science. To unleash it now would be to shatter his mentor's worldview, to burden him with a secret that defied all logic. Secrecy was a familiar cloak for the inheritors of One for All, and Deku pulled it tight around himself, even as the cold, smooth metal of the vambrace on his arm mocked the attempt. He looked down at the gauntlet, a tangible piece of the impossible. All Might. I had a breakthrough. The words felt like ash in his mouth. Tashinori's eyes, sharp and discerning despite his weakened state, narrowed slightly. A breakthrough? Young Midoriya, the doctors told me your arm was obliterated. A breakthrough doesn't knit shattered bone back together in a matter of hours. His gaze was locked on the golden-green armor. And that is not standard UA support gear. It is, Deku insisted, his voice a little too high, a little too fast. He seized on the half-truth he'd been formulating. Well, a new prototype. From Melissa. Melissa Shield. He hated using his friend's name like this, but desperation was a powerful acid, dissolving scruples. It arrived just before the fight. A special delivery. It's different. It's not just for bracing. It's designed to actively channel the energy of One for All. To act as a circuit. Instead of the power exploding from my limbs, this channels it through my body and out. During the fight, when I thought I was done for, something just clicked. I finally understood. He was weaving a tapestry of lies from threads of truth. He had felt a click. He did finally understand a new way to channel his power. He was just conveniently omitting the divine intervention that had made it possible. All Might was silent for a long moment, his gaze unreadable. He walked closer, his slippers scuffing softly on the linoleum. He reached out, not with his hand, but with his senses, the same senses that had allowed him to feel the embers of one for all, to recognize its presence in another. He could feel the familiar, roaring fire of the quirk within Deku. But layered over it, emanating from the gauntlet, was something else, an energy that felt like ancient stone, deep earth, and the first light of dawn. It was serene, unshakable, and utterly alien. It didn't clash with one for all, it harmonized with it, turning its chaotic drumming into a steady, powerful rhythm. "I see," All Might said, his voice carefully neutral. But his eyes told a different story. They were filled with a deep, bottomless well of concern. He knew Deku was hiding something. Something massive. He had seen this look in his students' eyes before. The look of a boy carrying a world he believed he had to carry alone. He had made a promise to himself after the first war that he would not let Deku walk that path again. For now, however, he would let the lie stand. Pushing would only drive the boy further away. "A new prototype from young Melissa," he repeated, the words tasting foreign on his tongue. "She does remarkable work. And this breakthrough in your control, it is a monumental step forward." He forced a smile, the familiar, reassuring grin of All Might, though it looked stretched and pained on his gaunt face. "I am proud of you, my boy. But you must rest. Even with perfect control, your stamina has its limits." Deku nodded, relieved and guilty in equal measure. "I know. I will." He wouldn't. Rest was a luxury he could no longer afford. He had a war to prepare for. The hospital, to the utter astonishment of its entire medical faculty, discharged Izuku Midoriya the very next morning. They had no explanation. The final scans showed a perfectly healed arm with no signs of trauma, scar tissue, or surgical intervention. The mysterious gauntlet remained, an unremovable, unscannable enigma that they were forced to note down in his file as unidentified advanced support gear. Deku bypassed the dorms, ignoring the worried texts flooding his phone from Uraraka and Ida. He went straight to the place that felt most like a sanctuary and a crucible, Gym Gamma. The vast, cavernous space, with its endlessly configurable landscape of concrete and steel, was empty. The air was cool and still. It was here that he had first learned to style his quirk, to shape his power from a self-destructive sledgehammer into something more. Now, he had to learn all over again. He stood in the center of the gym, the silence broken only by the hum of the ventilation system. He took a deep breath, closing his eyes, and focused inward. He reached for one for all. Instantly, the familiar power flooded his senses. The roaring chorus of the vestiges, the feeling of a sun igniting in his veins. But this time, the vambrace of fortitude responded. He felt a cool, calming sensation spread from the gauntlet up his arm and through his entire nervous system. The raw, chaotic energy of one for all was drawn toward it, filtered, and refined. Full cowling, 15%. The green lightning that erupted around him was different. It was sharper, more defined. Woven within the crackling emerald arcs were faint, shimmering threads of gold, almost imperceptible unless you were looking for them. The power settled over him like a second skin, comfortable and controlled. This was his old, safe limit. It felt like child's play now. He took a step, then another, moving through the basic katas All Might had taught him. The movements were fluid, effortless. The ever-present thrum of potential pain, the fear of a single miscalculation leading to another broken bone, was gone. "Okay," he whispered to himself. "Let's see." 30%. The power surged, a familiar kick. But where his muscles would usually scream in protest, now there was only a hum of immense strength. The golden threads in his lightning became more pronounced. He launched himself into the air, twisting and flipping, the control absolute. 45%. This was the precipice. This was the percentage that had, just yesterday, shattered his arm. He braced himself out of instinct, his teeth gritted. The power slammed into him, and the vambrace flared with a soft, internal golden light. He felt a pressure, an immense force being contained, but no pain. Not a single twinge. It was like holding the leash of a dragon that was suddenly, miraculously, obedient. He landed, his iron soles barely making a sound. He stood there, panting slightly, a grin of pure, unadulterated awe spreading across his face. "It works," he breathed. "It really works." He could feel the vestiges, too. They weren't a frantic chorus anymore. They were a quiet, appreciative audience, observing this new harmony with a sense of wonder. It is not a mere tool, young champion. The voice entered his mind calm and ancient, resonant as a temple bell. It was Presidium. Deku startled, looking around the empty gym before realizing the voice was coming from within, a direct line to his consciousness, seemingly channeled through the gauntlet. Presidium? He thought, feeling foolish for thinking the name. I am here. I am with you always now. The Aegis is a part of you, as you are a part of my cause. This feeling, this control. Deku marveled, flexing his armored hand. The vambrace of fortitude does not simply block the destructive force of your power, Presidium explained. It harmonizes with it. One for all is a power of bequeathal, of sacrifice and hope passed down through generations. It is a concept I understand well. The Aegis provides a divine framework, allowing the power to flow without overwhelming the vessel. You are no longer merely containing a storm. You are directing it. This changed everything. His entire fighting style, his career, his future, it was all different now. But with that exhilarating thought came a cold dose of reality. This power wasn't for him. It was for the war. You said there would be threats, Deku thought, his awe turning to grim focus. Creatures. You called them aberrations. The null spawn, Presidium's voice was laced with a weary disgust. They are the heralds of my adversary. Nihil cannot manifest its will directly, so it bleeds its essence into the cracks of your reality. Where there is great fear, deep-seated chaos, or profound despair, its influence can take root. It gives birth to things. Parasites of existence. Deku's blood ran cold. He thought of the spike in villain activity, the pervasive sense of dread that had settled over the country since the war. The whole of Japan was a breeding ground. These null spawn are not entirely of your world. To most mortals, they are invisible, their actions perceived only through their effects. A sudden, inexplicable wave of violence in a crowd, a rash of freak accidents along a stretch of highway. A creeping madness that seizes a neighborhood. Mortals see the symptoms, the chaos. They do not see the disease. The loneliness of his new duty settled on him like a shroud. How could he fight an enemy no one else could see? He would look like a madman, shadowboxing in the streets. How do I fight them? You can see them. You are my champion. My Aegis will allow you to perceive what is hidden. And your power, now harmonized with the divine, can harm them. You are the sole antibody to this plague, Izuku Midoriya. It is a terrible burden. But it is yours to bear. A new wave of determination solidified in his chest. A burden, yes. But also a purpose. He had been given the one tool that could fix this. He couldn't falter. He had to be stronger. He looked across the gym at the adamantine pillars used for strength testing. He took a deep breath. 50%. The power was a comfortable cloak. 55. A slight strain, like lifting a heavy weight. Manageable. He pushed further, into uncharted territory. 60%. The world seemed to vibrate. The green and gold lightning around him was a raging, controlled inferno. He felt like a god. He drew back his fist, his right fist, the one sheathed in the vambrace of fortitude, and punched. He didn't aim for the pillar. He punched the air in front of him. A pure, focused shockwave, a kinetic specter of his fist, shot across the gym. It was faster and more condensed than any Air Force blast he had ever created. It struck the pillar dead center. The resulting explosion was not just a sound, it was a physical event. The BBOM echoed off the walls, a deafening crack of thunder. The top half of the nigh indestructible pillar, a structure designed to withstand All Might's own smashes, was simply gone. Not crumbled. Not shattered. It was pulverized into a cloud of fine gray dust that hung in the air. Deku stood there, his arm extended, his body trembling not from strain, but from sheer, terrifying awe at the power he had just unleashed. There was no recoil. No pain. Only the low, steady hum of the vambrace on his arm. So this is it, he whispered. This is the power of a champion. The heavy metal door to the gym screeched open, the sound jarring him from his trance. What the hell was that, Deku? Deku's heart leaped into his throat. He spun around, the green-gold aura vanishing instantly. Standing in the doorway, silhouetted against the bright hallway light, was Katsuki Bakugo. His usual scowl was etched onto his face, but his crimson eyes were wide with something other than anger. It was a sharp, analytical shock. Bakugo's gaze swept across the room, taking in the scene with a predatory quickness. He saw Deku, standing perfectly unharmed. He saw the cloud of dust that used to be a pillar, and his eyes locked onto the vambrace of fortitude. "What the hell is that thing on your arm?" Bakugo stalked into the gym, his movements tight and aggressive. "And don't give me some bullshit story. I heard you were in the hospital, heard your arm was turned to mush." Again, Deku's mind went blank. The lie he had prepared for All Might felt flimsy and pathetic under Bakugo's piercing stare. Bakugo had known him his entire life. He had an instinctual, almost infuriatingly accurate read on Deku's power and his tells. It's a new support item, Kaken," Deku stammered, falling back on the prepared script. From America. It helps with channeling." "Bullshit," Bakugo spat, cutting him off. He was closer now, circling Deku like a wolf. "Channeling? You think I'm an idiot? I've been watching you struggle with that power since you got it. I saw you at 45%. I saw the price. You were breaking every time you pushed. What I just heard. That was more than 45. That was more than 50. And you're standing there without a single damn scratch." He stopped, jabbing a finger toward Deku's face. "And there's something else. When I came in, there was a light. Gold. Mixed in with your usual green crap. I saw it. So you're going to tell me what the hell is going on? Did you get another quirk? Did that floaty cape bastard do something to you? Are you hiding something again, you damn nerd?" The accusation hit home. Hiding something again. It was what he had done his whole life, first with his quirklessness, then with One for All. Bakugo saw this as just another chapter in the same old story of Deku's secrets, and his rage was fueled by a lifetime of feeling left in the dark. "It's not like that, Kaken," Deku insisted, taking a step back. "Then what is it like?" Bakugo roared, his palms beginning to crackle with tiny explosions. "You think we're not all connected in this? You think after everything, after the war, after you ran off on your own, that you can just get some magic new power-up and not tell anyone? That you'd get to carry it all yourself?" Beneath the rage, Deku heard the faint, buried echo of genuine concern. It was the same sentiment Bakugo had expressed when he'd helped bring him back to UA. It was a twisted, aggressive form of camaraderie, but it was real. And Deku's secrecy was a slap in the face to it, but he couldn't tell him. The truth was too dangerous, too insane. He met Bakugo's furious gaze, his own resolve hardening. For the first time, he didn't flinch. The vambrace on his arm felt solid, reassuring. "I can handle it, Kaken." Bakugo stared at him, his explosions dying down. He saw the change. The old, timid Deku would have been stammering, apologizing, shrinking back. This Deku stood his ground. His eyes, for a split second as he channeled his inner resolve, seemed to flash with that same faint, otherworldly gold light. Bakugo saw it. And he knew. He knew he wasn't going to get the truth. Not now. He scoffed, a short, bitter sound. "Fine. Handle it. But when this new secret of yours blows up in your face, and it will, don't come crying to me. Just try not to take the rest of us down with you when it does." With a final, disgusted glare, Bakugo turned on his heel and stormed out of the gym, leaving Deku alone in the echoing silence, the dust of the destroyed pillars slowly settling around him. The weight of his secret felt heavier than ever. Later that evening, the oppressive weight had not lessened. Deku sat on one of the plush couches in the Class 1A common room, a textbook open on his lap. He'd been staring at the same page for 20 minutes, the words blurring into meaningless shapes. His mind was elsewhere, in a realm of gods and monsters, of golden light and creeping dread. He was physically present, but his spirit was adrift. He kept replaying Presidium's words, a mantra of his new reality. The null spawn. Invisible. Parasites of existence. You are the sole antibody. A plate with a meticulously cut apple and a glass of water was placed on the table in front of him. He looked up, startled. "You haven't eaten since you got back, Midoriya." Tenya Ida stood there, his posture as rigid as ever, but his expression was soft with concern. His glasses caught the light as he adjusted them. Proper nutrition is essential for recovery and optimal hero performance, even if your recovery was unprecedentedly swift. Achiko Uraraka sat down on the couch next to him, her brow furrowed. Are you okay, Deku? You seem far away. We were all so worried when we heard you were in the hospital, and then you just show up, perfectly fine, but you've been quiet all day. And what's with the new gauntlet? She added, gesturing to his right arm. He wore his school uniform, but the vambrace was irremovable, a constant, visible reminder of his pact. He told the class the same lie he told All Might, a story about a new support item from America that had to be professionally fitted and removed later. Most had accepted it, dazzled by the idea of bleeding-edge tech from the world-famous SHIELD family, but his closest friends knew him better. They saw past the excuses. They saw the boy underneath. I'm fine, guys. Really? Deku said, trying to muster a convincing smile. It felt like a poorly fitting mask. Just a lot on my mind. The fight was intense. And I'm still getting used to the new gear. Uraraka's gaze was gentle but perceptive. It's more than that, isn't it? Ever since you came back to UA, you've been carrying something heavy. We can see it. We just want you to know you don't have to carry it by yourself. We're here for you. All of us. Her simple, heartfelt words were a dagger of guilt in his chest. They were offering him the very thing he desperately needed, support, friendship, a shared burden, and he was forced to push it away. This wasn't a secret like One for All, which he could, in the direst of circumstances, share. This was a divine mandate. To involve them would be to paint a target on their backs for forces they couldn't possibly comprehend. This was his war. His burden alone. He felt another voice echo in his mind, the calm, weary tone of Presidium. The armor grows as the hero does. It is forged not only in the heat of battle, but in the crucible of the heart. The vambrace of fortitude was born from your will to endure any cost. The god's voice was a quiet undercurrent to the conversation in the room. Other virtues will be required of you. The courage to face the unknown. The hope you must inspire in others, and the willingness to sacrifice. Sacrifice. The word landed with a thud in his soul. He was already sacrificing his honesty, his openness with his friends. What else would this war demand of him? He looked at Ida's earnest, worried face. He looked at Uraraka, her expression a perfect portrait of empathy. These were the people he was fighting for. This was the light he was shielding from the encroaching dark. I know, Deku said, his voice thick with an emotion he couldn't name. Thank you? It means more than you know. He closed his textbook. He couldn't pretend anymore. He needed to be alone. To think. To prepare. I think I'm just going to turn in early, he said, standing up. I'm still more tired than I thought. Ida and Uraraka exchanged a worried glance but nodded in acceptance. As Deku walked toward the elevators, he felt their eyes on his back, heavy with unanswered questions. The Aegis was a shield against his enemies, but it was also becoming a wall between him and his friends. Back in the silence of his All Might-themed room, Deku stood by the window, looking out over the peaceful, well-lit grounds of UA. It was a fortress of hope in a darkening world. His fortress to defend. He flexed his armored hand, the golden filigree catching the moonlight. The power felt immense, a cosmic secret held in the palm of his hand. It was a gift, a tool, a burden, a curse. A sudden chill traced its way down his spine, a feeling utterly divorced from the temperature of the room. It was a coldness that felt metaphysical, like a pinprick of vacuum had opened and closed in the fabric of reality. The vambrace on his arm pulsed with a faint, almost imperceptible golden light, a silent alarm only he could perceive. And in the depths of his mind, the voice of Presidium returned, no longer calm and philosophical, but grim and urgent. It begins. Deku stood straighter, his entire body going on high alert. He scanned the grounds below, his eyes piercing the darkness. He saw nothing out of the ordinary. A shadow coalesces in Mizurufu. In the shopping district you fought in only yesterday. The lingering fear from the attack, it has become a seed. Something is feeding on it. The first hunt was here. His first true test as a champion. It grows stronger with every scream, every panic thought, every shadow that makes a civilian flinch. It is fear given form. Presidium's final words were a solemn command, sealing Deku's fate for the night, and for all the nights to come. Go, my Aegis. Face the echo of the void. The words echoed in the silent sanctuary of his mind, a divine decree that simultaneously thrilled and terrified him. It begins. The chill that had traced its way down Izuku Midoriya's spine was not a product of the night air. It was a coldness that seeped into his bones, a metaphysical shiver signaling a tear in the fabric of his reality. The vambrace of fortitude on his arm, which had been a passive, comforting weight all day, now pulsed with a soft, internal golden light, a silent alarm only he could perceive. It was like a compass needle that had suddenly found its true, terrible north. He was no longer just Izuku Midoriya, UA student. He was the Aegis. He was a hunter. Go, my Aegis. Face the echo of the void. The command from Presidium was solemn, absolute. There was no room for doubt or hesitation. He had to move. Now, but he was a student in the most secure high school in the world. Getting out unnoticed after curfew, especially after his last unsanctioned departure, was a monumental task. The UA barrier was a fortress wall, and Mr. Aizawa was its ever-watchful sentinel. He slipped out of his room, his movements silent. He bypassed the elevators, taking the stairs two at a time. He couldn't just leap over the wall. The security systems would trigger instantly. He had to go through official channels. Which meant he had to face his teacher. He found Mr. Aizawa in the faculty monitoring station, a darkened room filled with the soft glow of dozens of screens displaying camera feeds from every corner of the campus. Aizawa sat hunched over a console, his tired eyes scanning the monitors, a thermos of black coffee at his elbow. He didn't look up as Deku entered. Midoriya, he said, his voice a low, weary rasp. You should be in your dorm. It's past curfew. I know, sir. I'm sorry to disturb you. Deku's heart hammered against his ribs. He had to make this believable. It's just... I received an alert. A potential situation developing in the Muzidafu commercial district. Near the site of yesterday's attack, Aizawa's gaze finally lifted from the screens, his eyes sharp and analytical, cutting through Deku's nervousness. An alert? From who? None of our systems have flagged anything. It's from the American team that developed my new support gear. Deku lied, the falsehood tasting like acid. He hated this, hated deceiving the teacher who had sacrificed so much for him. The gauntlet has experimental long-range sensors. It picks up unique energy signatures associated with high-stress quirk usage and instability. It's a prototype feature. It could be a false positive, but given the location, I thought I should go and scout it out. Just a visual confirmation. I won't engage. The lie was thin, stretched taut over a frame of pure nonsense, and he knew it. But it was the only thing he had. Aizawa stared at him for a long, uncomfortable moment. His gaze drifted to the vambrace on Deku's arm, a piece of technology that defied all his understanding. He had read the full report, unscannable, irremovable, with a healing effect that bordered on miraculous. He didn't believe the prototype from America's story for a second. But he also knew the look in Midoriya's eyes. It was the same look he'd had when he was chasing after All for One alone, a terrible, world-shouldering resolve. Pushing for the truth now would be fruitless. He let out a long, slow sigh, the sound of a man perpetually exhausted by the secrets of his problem child. You will maintain radio contact at all times. You will report your findings every 5 minutes. You will not, under any circumstances, engage a hostile force alone. If you see anything, you call for backup and pull back immediately. Are those terms clear? Relief washed over Deku so intensely he felt lightheaded. Crystal clear, sir. Thank you. Don't thank me. Aizawa grumbled, turning back to his monitors and keying in a command to grant Deku temporary clearance through the perimeter gates. Just try not to start another war before sunrise. I'd like to at least finish my coffee. With his teacher's reluctant permission secured, Deku raced to his room. He swapped his school uniform for his battered hero costume, the familiar fabric a comforting second skin. The vambrace settled over the sleeve, the ancient gold and futuristic green a stark contrast to the worn, dark green material. He pulled on his cowl, the world narrowing to what was in front of him. He moved through the silent grounds of UA, a ghost in the night. The massive gates slid open for him, and as he stepped out into the world beyond the school's protection, he felt a profound shift. He was no longer a student. He was on the hunt. Full cowling 30%. The green and gold lightning flared to life around him, quiet and controlled. He didn't need to ramp up. The vambrace made the power instantly accessible, stable. He launched himself into the air, using a controlled burst of air force from his feet to propel himself onto a rooftop. The city spread out before him, a sprawling tapestry of lights and shadows. He moved across the rooftops, a silent, verdant streak against the night sky. The power coursing through him was intoxicating. He was faster than he'd ever been, his movements more precise. He used Blackwork to swing between buildings, the tendrils of dark energy lashing out with perfect, thought-based accuracy. He could feel the synergy. The vambrace wasn't just affecting one for all, it was stabilizing his connection to the other quirks within it, making them feel less like borrowed tools and more like natural extensions of his own body. As he closed in on the Musitifa commercial district, the feeling Presidium had warned him of intensified. It was a subtle wrongness in the air, a dissonant chord in the symphony of the city. He landed on the edge of a skyscraper, overlooking the epicenter of yesterday's battle. From a distance, it looked normal. Police barriers cordoned off the worst of the damage. A few emergency vehicles were still on scene, their lights painting slow, lazy circles on the rubble. But as he focused, he began to see the symptoms. A car swerved violently for no reason, its tires screeching as it mounted the curb, narrowly missing a streetlight. Further down, two civilians who had been having a calm conversation suddenly started shouting at each other, their faces contorted in rage. A lone police officer standing guard at the perimeter suddenly clutched his head, his expression one of sheer, unadulterated terror, his eyes wide and staring at something only he could see. They see the symptoms, not the disease, Presidium's voice echoed in his mind. I see it too, Deku whispered, his eyes scanning the chaotic scene. But I don't see the source. Look closer, Presidium urged. Do not use only your eyes. Use my gift. Feel the fear. Trace it to its heart. Deku closed his eyes. He let go of the sights and sounds of the physical world and focused on that cold, alien feeling. He reached out with his senses, following the threads of panic and dread that were weaving through the street below. They all converged on one spot, a small, shadowy plaza nestled between two half-collapsed buildings, an area still deep in shadow, untouched by the streetlights. He opened his eyes. And he saw it. It was wrong. It didn't fully exist in the physical world, its form shimmering and translucent, like a heat haze on a summer road. But it was there. It was vaguely humanoid, tall and unnaturally thin, its body seemingly woven from solidified shadow and iridescent oil slicks. Where its head should have been, a writhing mass of serpents coiled and hissed, but they weren't made of flesh. They were tendrils of pure, negative energy, whispering silent insanities into the air. The Nullgorgon. It had no legs, its lower body trailing off into a smoky miasma that clung to the cracked pavement. Its arms were long and skeletal, ending in claws that seemed to tear at the very air around them. But its most terrifying feature was its face, or the lack thereof. Beneath the crown of shadow serpents, there was only a smooth, blank expanse. Until it sensed him. The creature turned its featureless face towards his rooftop perch. 2 points of malevolent, crimson light ignited in the void of its head, its eyes. And as they locked onto him, they flared. It was not a light. It was an attack. An invisible, psychic wave slammed into Deku, bypassing his physical defenses entirely. It wasn't pain. It was worse. His own deepest, most paralyzing fears, dredged up from the depths of his soul and thrown back in his face. He saw himself as a child, small and quirkless, watching a video of All Might on repeat, tears streaming down his face as the doctor's words echoed in his ears. You should probably give it up. He saw All Might, gaunt and skeletal, his blood pouring from his mouth as he fought all for one, his life draining away because Deku hadn't been strong enough. He saw Sir Naitai, impaled and dying, his final words a prophecy of a gruesome, pointless death. He saw his friends, Uraraka, Ida, Todoroki, Bakugo, their faces pale and lifeless, their bodies broken in the rubble of a city he had failed to protect. He saw his mother, weeping over his grave. He saw a world drowning in darkness, with no symbol of peace to offer a single ray of light. The fear was absolute. It was a venom that seized his muscles, froze the air in his lungs, and screamed a single, deafening word in his mind: failure. His knees buckled. The green lightning around him sputtered and died. His hands, gripping the ledge of the roof, trembled violently. He wanted to run. He wanted to curl into a ball and disappear. The creature below wasn't just exuding fear. It was a living embodiment of his own personal hell. Courage is not the absence of fear. Presidium's voice cut through the psychic assault, a lifeline of golden warmth in the freezing terror. It is the refusal to surrender to it. Fight, my champion. This is the first test. Deku gritted his teeth, a raw, ragged gasp tearing from his throat. He pushed back against the tide of despair with sheer, stubborn will. He remembered Bakugo's challenge in the gym. He remembered Uraraka's gentle concern. He remembered All Might's trusting, worried eyes. He couldn't fail them. He wouldn't. He forced his legs to straighten. He reactivated One for All, the green and gold light flaring back to life, a defiant bonfire against the encroaching cold. The fear was still there, a coiling serpent in his gut, but he had it by the throat. I won't run, he snarled, his voice a low growl. The null gorgon below seemed to recoil slightly, as if surprised by his resistance. The crimson eyes flared again, but this time Deku was ready. He focused on the feeling, on the warmth of Presidium's power emanating from the vambrace, using it as an anchor. The wave of fear washed over him, but it didn't break him. He had to end this. Fast. He crouched low, channeling power into his legs. F.A. Gene. He built up the kinetic energy, ready to launch himself like a cannonball. His target was the creature's head, the source of the attack. Manchester. Smash! He shot off the rooftop, a green and gold missile aimed at the heart of the plaza. He descended in a devastating axe kick, the full force of a 55% blow behind it. He would shatter it, disperse its energy, and end this nightmare. His boot connected, and passed right through. It was like kicking smoke. There was no impact, no resistance. His foot went straight through the Gorgon's shadowy head, the momentum carrying him down to the ground. He hit the pavement hard, rolling to absorb the impact, his bones rattling but unbroken thanks to One for All's reinforcement. He scrambled back to his feet, spinning around to face the creature. It was completely unharmed, its form wavering for a moment before solidifying again. Its silent, psychic laughter echoed in his mind, a wave of pure mockery. Physical attacks were useless. Presidium, what do I do? He yelled, his voice echoing in the empty plaza. To anyone watching, he was screaming at thin air. I can't touch it. It is a creature of myth, born of a metaphysical concept, the god explained, his voice calm and instructive. You cannot punch fear. You cannot kick despair. Its gaze is its primary weapon, its anchor to this reality. To defeat it, you must fight it on its own terms. Think, champion. Remember the old stories. How did the heroes of myth defeat the Gorgon of their time? The old stories. His mind, the analytical engine that had deconstructed quirks and battle strategies for years, kicked into gear. The Gorgon. Medusa. A hero who couldn't look at his foe. Persis. He hadn't looked at it directly. He had used the shield. A reflection. A wave of inspiration, a eureka moment, cut through his fear. He had to fight it indirectly. He had to use its own weapon against it, or at least, find a way to engage it without meeting its paralyzing gaze. His eyes darted around the ruined plaza. Debris was everywhere. Smashed cars, shattered storefronts, fallen signs. He needed a mirror, there. To his left, leaning against the wall of a collapsed electronics store, was a massive pane of tempered glass, blown out from a high-rise window. It was at least 10 feet tall, miraculously intact save for a few cracks. Its surface was covered in a layer of gray dust, but it was still reflective. The Gorgon began to drift towards him, its shadow serpents hissing with anticipation. The waves of fear were constant now, a psychic drone that threatened to overwhelm him. He had to move. He fired a strand of black whip, the dark energy grappling the top corner of the glass pane. He pulled, grunting with effort as he dragged the heavy sheet of glass across the plaza, propping it up against a large chunk of concrete. It was angled perfectly, giving him a clear, if dusty, view of the creature. Now for the hard part. He turned his back on the monster, facing the reflection in the glass. It was a bizarre, disorienting way to fight. Everything was backward. The null gorgon in the reflection floated forward. Its crimson eyes flared, but the fear was different. Muted. Looking at the reflection seemed to dampen the psychic assault, like looking at the sun through a smoked glass. It was still there, a heavy pressure on his mind, but it was no longer paralyzing. "It's working!" he breathed, a giddy sense of hope surging through him. He watched the reflection as the gorgon raised one of its skeletal claws. He saw the attack coming and sidestepped in the real world, the claw passing harmlessly through the space he had just occupied. He retaliated. He couldn't punch it, but maybe his ranged attacks would work. "Delaware smash! Air force!" He flicked his fingers, sending a concentrated blast of air not at the creature, but at its reflection. He watched the reflection to aim, and the real blast shot from his fingers, striking the real gorgon square in its torso. This time, there was an effect. The creature let out a silent scream, its form flickering violently, like a bad television signal. The shadowy wisps that composed its body dispersed for a second before coalescing again. It hurt the creature. But it wasn't enough. It recovered almost instantly. The null gorgon seemed to understand his strategy. It let out another silent shriek, this one of fury, and lunged not at him, but at the glass pane. Its claws slashed through the air, aimed to shatter his only advantage. "No, you don't!" Deku moved, a blur of motion. He had to protect the mirror. He fired 2 strands of black whip, wrapping them around the creature's arms, pulling them back just as they were about to strike the glass. The gorgon struggled, its psychic power flaring. The fear intensified again, and Deku felt his resolve waver. He saw an image of Bakugo, caught in the sludge villain's grasp, choking, his eyes pleading for help. "Stay focused," he roared in his own mind. He poured more power into Black Whip, the dark energy straining to hold the monster of fear. This was a battle of attrition. It was feeding on the ambient chaos of the city, regenerating from every blow. He, on the other hand, was running on a finite supply of stamina. He needed a way to end it, a way to do lasting damage. "It feeds on fear," Presidium stated, his voice a guiding light. "Then you must give it the opposite. It is an aberration of the void, a creature of chaos and entropy. You must strike it with order, with hope, with unwavering resolve." Unwavering resolve. The phrase stuck in his mind. The gorgon, enraged by his persistence, unleashed a new attack. It wasn't a gaze, but a wave of force. The ground around it cracked, and a shockwave of pure terror radiated outwards. It wasn't aimed at his mind, but at his body. It was designed to knock him off his feet, to make him fall, to make him submit. Deku dug his iron-soled boots into the cracked asphalt, his legs trembling under the immense pressure. It felt like a physical weight, a mountain of dread pressing down on him. His knees threatened to buckle, the glass pane behind him rattled. If he fell, it would shatter. If it shattered, he was lost. He had to stand. He had to hold his ground. For the people in the city who couldn't see this thing. For the promise he made to Presidium. For his own dream of being a hero who never gives up. He roared, a sound of pure, primal defiance, and pushed back. He channeled One for All into his legs, not for speed, but for stability. He became an anchor, a rock against the tide of fear. He would not be moved. He would not falter. His path was forward. His resolve was absolute. "I will not fall!" he ground out through clenched teeth. And then, something new happened. A brilliant, golden-green light erupted from his legs. It was warm, solid, and impossibly powerful. He felt the pressure of the fear wave vanish, as if it were breaking against an unbreakable shore. The light solidified, flowing over his battered boots and up his shins, forming a pair of divine greaves. They were designed with the same intricate, swirling patterns as the vambrace, a perfect match of forest green and shimmering gold. They felt as light as air, yet imbued his stance with the solidity of a mountain. He could feel a new power humming within them, a power of speed and stability. The greaves of unwavering path had manifested. You have proven your courage, Presidium's voice hummed with approval. You faced the embodiment of fear and refused to retreat. You held to your path. You have earned the next piece of the Aegis. The shockwave of terror dissipated, its power broken. The Null Gorgon reeled back, its crimson eyes wide with what looked, ironically, like fear. It had met a force it could not comprehend, a mortal will so strong it could manifest divine power. Deku felt a surge of new energy. The greaves were not just defensive, they were a conduit. He could feel one for all flowing through them, smoother and faster than ever before. He looked at his reflection in the dusty glass. He saw himself, clad now in the vambrace and the greaves, glowing with a faint green and gold light. He saw the Gorgon's reflection, flickering and unstable. He knew what he had to do. He pushed off the ground, and the world became a blur. The speed granted by the greaves was phenomenal. He was no longer just fast. He was a whisper of motion. He ran not at the Gorgon, but in a wide circle around the plaza, a whirlwind of emerald and gold. It feeds on fear, he said to himself, his plan solidifying. So I'll give it hope. He began to channel his power, not into his fists, but into his very presence. He poured all his willpower, all his heroic determination, all the defiant hope that had defined his entire life, into his full cowling. The golden threads within his lightning became brilliant, dominant, overtaking the green. He was a beacon in the darkness, a living, breathing symbol of defiance against the void. The Gorgon shrieked, its form destabilizing rapidly in the face of this pure, conceptual onslaught. The ambient fear it was drawing from the city was being cancelled out, overwhelmed by the sheer force of Deku's heroism. He closed in, still watching the reflection. He saw the monster's last, desperate move. All its shadow serpents lashed out at once, a final attempt to break his spirit. He didn't dodge. He ran straight through them. The tendrils of fear washed over him, but they found no purchase. They were like water on hot steel, sizzling into nothing against the brilliant aura of the Aegis. He was right in front of it now, his back still to the real creature. He looked at its terrified, crimson eyes in the reflection. He drew back his right fist, the vambrace of fortitude glowing with immense power. He poured everything into this final blow, one for all at 65%, the defiant courage that had earned him the greaves, and the last dregs of his stamina. He didn't need to see the target. He knew where it was. St. Louis smash! He spun on his heel, his movement a flawless, blindingly fast arc powered by the greaves. His fist connected with the Null Gorgon's head. This time, it wasn't like punching smoke. It was like punching a bell, and the resulting tone was the pure, clear note of hope itself. A shockwave of golden light exploded from the point of impact. It wasn't destructive. It was cleansing. The light washed over the plaza and spread out into the surrounding streets in a silent, invisible wave. The Null Gorgon did not explode or disintegrate. It simply dissolved. The shadowy form unraveled, the crimson eyes faded, and the hissing tendrils of fear evaporated, leaving nothing behind but the cool night air. The effect was instantaneous. Across the district, the chaos ceased. The man who had been shouting in a fit of rage blinked, looking at his neighbor in confusion, an apology already forming on his lips. The police officer clutching his head straightened up, the terror vanishing as quickly as it had come, leaving him with a pounding headache and a sense of profound bewilderment. The driver who had swerved his car stared at the curb, wondering what had made him do that. The psychic plague was gone. The fever had broken. In the plaza, Deku stood panting, his body screaming with exhaustion. The green and gold aura faded, leaving him trembling in the sudden silence. The vambrace and the new greaves felt heavy, the weight of his victory and his duty. He stumbled over to the glass pane and leaned against it, his legs feeling like jelly. He had won. His first hunt was a success. But the victory felt hollow, isolating. He was the only one who knew what had just happened, the only one who understood the threat that had been averted. He keyed his comms unit, his voice raspy. Aizawa-sensei. Deku here. Report. Aizawa's voice was instant, tense. It was a false alarm. Deku lied, the words tasting even fouler than before. Some residual energy from the fight yesterday must have tripped the sensors. The area is secure. I'm returning to campus. There was a long pause on the other end. Copy that, Midoriya. Return immediately. Aizawa's tone was flat, but Deku could hear the unspoken suspicion, the questions he knew were coming. He pushed himself off the glass, his body aching in a way that had nothing to do with injury. It was the ache of a soul carrying too much weight. He began the long, slow journey back to Yue, a lone figure moving through the sleeping city, his new armor a silent testament to the secret war he was now condemned to fight. He was a hero. He was a champion, and he had never felt so utterly alone. The silence of Tartarus was not a peaceful thing. It was a suffocating, pressurized void designed to crush the spirit as thoroughly as its walls crushed any hope of escape. It was the absolute zero of human connection, a tomb for the living where the only sound was the faint, rhythmic hum of its own infallible security systems. For All For One, this silence was merely a canvas. He sat within his high-security cell, a throne of medical equipment and life support tubing, his body a broken ruin but his mind a raging, undimmed inferno. The mask that covered his obliterated face was a mockery of a human visage, but behind it, his consciousness soared unfettered. He had lost the battle, lost his protege Tamura Shigaraki, lost his freedom. But a being like All For One did not measure existence in terms of single losses. He measured it in opportunities. And here, in the deepest, most secure prison on Earth, an opportunity of cosmic proportions was about to present itself. He had felt it days ago. A subtle shift in the metaphysical firmament. A tremor not of this world. It was a golden, cloying resonance of order and protection, an energy so antithetical to his own nature that it felt like a physical irritant, a sliver of light under a vampire's eyelid. He recognized its flavor, if not its source. It was the same energy that had always clung to the users of One For All, that nauseating stench of self-sacrifice, but amplified 1,000-fold. It was a signal that the game had changed. He had spent his long life treating quirks as a collector would treat rare artifacts, things to be coveted, stolen, and wielded. But he had always sensed something deeper, a conceptual layer to reality that quirks merely scratched the surface of. He had sought to become a symbol, a demon lord, to manipulate the very narrative of his world. He had come close. But he was, in the end, still just a man. A man with many powers, yes, but mortal. Limited. This new resonance in the world, it was not mortal. He reached out with the senses he had cultivated over a century, the myriad quirks within him acting as antennae, probing the veil of reality. He did not know what he was searching for, only that if his enemies were tapping into a new source of power, then he must find its opposite. If they had found a god of light, he would find a god of darkness. He cast his will into the void, a silent, ravenous prayer. It was not a plea for help, for All For One never pleaded. It was a declaration of intent. A broadcast of his own magnificent, all-consuming ego. I am the one who takes. I am the one who dominates. The world is a chaotic, meaningless engine, and I am the only one with the will to master it. All things exist to be consumed, to be added to my power. If there is a greater darkness out there, a greater hunger, then come to me. Come to the one who truly understands your nature. He did not expect an answer. It was an act of supreme arrogance, a shout into an empty cathedral. But the cathedral was not empty. Something answered. It did not come as a voice or a vision. It came as a feeling. A slow, creeping tide of absolute nothingness. The pressurized silence of Tartarus was, in comparison, a symphony of life. This new presence was the chilling, final silence of a dead universe. It was the concept of the void made manifest. A presence so vast and so empty it threatened to unmake his very consciousness simply by observing him. Any other mind, even Tamura Shigaraki's at the height of his power, would have been scoured clean, reduced to a drooling imbecile. But All For One was not any other mind. He met this crushing, existential dread not with fear, but with a giddy, horrifying sense of recognition. He felt like a man who had spent his life studying shadows, only to finally meet the sunless abyss from which all shadows are born. He laughed. A wheezing, rattling sound filtered through his masked vocoder, utterly devoid of humor and filled with triumphant madness. You are not afraid. The thought was not his own. It seeped into his mind like black ink into water, a voice that was the utter absence of sound. It was the voice of Nihil, the god of annihilation, the beautiful, final entropy at the end of all things. Afraid? All for one projected his thoughts, his tone dripping with amused contempt. Why would I fear the inevitable? I have devoted my life to being its instrument. The strong consuming the weak is the only law of nature. You are simply the final, logical extension of that law. All things fall apart. All things end. It's the most beautiful truth in creation, you understand. There was a flicker of something akin to approval in the crushing void. The other, the golden fool, seeks to preserve. To protect. It props up the broken, the weak. It is a gardener who refuses to prune a dying tree, allowing the rot to spread. It is an act of supreme arrogance to defy the flow of the river. Presidium, they called it once. All for one mused, dredging up a name from some forgotten text he'd absorbed centuries ago. The shield. A pathetic concept. A shield only delays the inevitable. A sword, however, a sword gets to decide how the inevitable happens. It has chosen a new champion. The voice of Nihil was cold, dispassionate. A small, bright flame of defiance. A boy. He carries the torch of your old enemies. Now, he carries the aegis of the dying god. He defeated one of my fledgling children, a boy. The ninth user. Izuka Midoriya, of course. The universe, in its cruel, poetic irony, had chosen his ultimate nemesis as the champion of his ultimate enemy's enemy. It was perfect. All for one's laughter echoed in his cell once more, louder this time. So the little hero has found himself a patron saint, he sneered. How quaint. He seeks to be a shield for a world that is already crumbling. I, on the other hand, wish to be the hammer that brings it down. You wish for power. You wish to consume. To control. I wish to be the one holding the board when the game ends. All for one corrected. I wish for everything to become a part of me. To achieve a perfect, singular state of being. Is that not a form of annihilation? The destruction of the many to create the one? He had found the perfect words. He had aligned his personal philosophy with a cosmic absolute. He was not just asking for power, he was presenting himself as the perfect, most willing vessel for a divine purpose. The presence of Nihil swelled, the feeling of nothingness becoming so immense that the very walls of his cell seemed to fade into a gray mist. Your ambition is pure. Your hunger, absolute. You see the truth. You do not need armor to shield you, for you embrace the void. You do not need boons, for you are already my kindred. I will not give you a gift. I will grant you a blessing. I will unlock the potential for decay that already exists within you. I will show you how to unravel the threads of creation. A new energy, the antithesis of the golden warmth Deku had felt, poured into All for One. It was not a tide, it was a vacuum. A sucking, pulling force of pure anti-existence. It did not fill him, it hollowed him. It latched on to the hundreds of quirks nestled within his soul, the grand collection he had spent a lifetime accumulating. And it began to twist them. The process was agonizing. It was a deconstruction on a cellular and spiritual level. A quirk that allowed him to generate kinetic energy was warped, now siphoning kinetic energy from its surroundings, leaving everything it touched cold and brittle. A minor regeneration quirk was inverted, now accelerating decay in living tissue with a touch. His air pressure cannons no longer fired blasts of force. They fired cones of tangible silence that deadened sound and snuffed out light. Every power he possessed was perverted, becoming a grotesque parody of its former self, an instrument of entropy. The life support systems connected to his body began to whine and short-circuit, the machinery aging decades in a matter of seconds. The metal of his containment cell groaned, microscopic fractures spreading across its surface as the very concept of its solidity was assailed. He screamed. Not in pain, but in ecstatic, agonizing rebirth. This was true power. Not the petty ability to punch harder or move faster. This was the power to unmake. The blessing settled. The agonizing transformation subsided, leaving him panting in the darkness of his now failing cell. The emergency power kicked in, bathing the room in a hellish red light. Alarms began to blare throughout Tartarus, the sounds distant and irrelevant. You are my herald, Nihil's voice stated, a final, chilling proclamation. Show this world the beauty of my silence. Teach the little champion of Presidium that all shields eventually break, all lights eventually flicker and die. Start with his foundation. Start with his hope. The presence of Nihil receded, leaving All for One alone with his newfound, terrible power. He slowly, deliberately, raised a hand. The flesh was gray and desiccated, like that of a mummy, but it pulsed with a black, necrotic energy that seemed to drink the red emergency light from the air. He reached out and placed his palm flat against the inner wall of his cell, a barrier forged from meters of quark-reinforced steel and concrete, designed to be the most secure structure on the planet. He didn't push. He simply willed it. He imagined the wall not as a solid object, but as a temporary arrangement of atoms, a fleeting concept of solidity. And he introduced the concept of absence. With a sound like grinding dust and tearing fabric, a perfect, circular hole simply appeared in the wall. There was no explosion, no debris. The matter that had been there was just gone, unwritten from the book of reality. Through the hole, he could see the next corridor, where guards in panic-stricken motion were scrambling towards his cell. All for One stood, the life support tubes tearing away from his body. He did not need them anymore. He was sustained now by the void itself. He was no longer just a man in a mask. He was a wound in the world. He was the herald of Nihil, the first lesson. He whispered, his voice a dry rustle of dead leaves. Is that fortresses are an illusion? On the other side of the country, Izuka Midoriya felt it. He was in Gym Gamma again, trying to replicate the conditions of his battle with the Null Gorgon. He was attempting to consciously manifest another piece of the Aegis, focusing on the concepts of hope and sacrifice. But nothing was happening. The Vambrace and Greaves remained, humming with their quiet power, but the armor was not a machine that responded to simple input. It was a reflection of his soul, and it would grow only when truly tested. He was practicing his speed with the Greaves of Unwavering Path, a streak of green and gold, when a wave of pure, cosmic nausea washed over him. It was the polar opposite of Presidium's comforting warmth. It was a sucking, chilling void, a vortex of dread that made the Null Gorgon's Furora feel like a pleasant daydream. The very air in the gym seemed to grow thin and cold. The light from the fixtures flickered, and a deep silence fell, swallowing the sound of his own frantic heartbeat. The green and gold lightning around him sputtered and died. He stumbled to a halt, clutching his chest, a strangled gasp escaping his lips. He felt as if the universe had blinked, and in that blink, something vital had been extinguished. No, Presidium's voice was a whisper in his mind, but for the first time, it was laced with something he had never heard before, genuine fear. What is it? Deku gasped, looking around the empty gym. What was that, Nihil? It has found him. Found who? The one soul in your world whose darkness, whose ambition, whose hunger for dominion rivals its own. It has chosen its champion. A cold, familiar dread, worse than any psychic attack, settled in Deku's stomach. There was only one person Presidium could be talking about. A man whose very existence was a blight on the world. All for One. Deku breathed, the name tasting like poison. He is no longer just a man. Presidium's voice was grave, heavy with the weight of ages. He has accepted the blessing of the void. He is the herald of Nihil. The war is no longer a clandestine hunt for monsters in the dark, young champion. Now you have a rival. An equal and opposite force. The implications crashed down on Deku with the force of a physical blow. All for One, the man who had crippled All Might, the ultimate villain, the source of so much of the world's pain, was now empowered by a god of annihilation. His already immense power was now amplified by a cosmic force of entropy. How could he possibly fight that? He was just a boy, with 2 pieces of divine armor and a quirk that was still trying to kill him half the time. As if sensing his despair, Presidium's voice softened, a faint glimmer of warmth returning. Do not despair. That is its weapon. Your hope is yours. The herald will seek to break you, to prove that all things crumble. You must seek to prove that some things endure. You are the shield. He is the rust. The battle has truly begun. The cold feeling receded, but the knowledge of what had happened remained, a permanent scar on his soul. The stakes had just been raised from a battle for a city to a war for existence itself. Chaos erupted from Tartarus like a ruptured dam. It was not a mass breakout. It was something far more precise, and far more terrifying. The initial reports that reached the Hero Public Safety Commission were confused, contradictory. A power failure, a containment breach in the maximum security wing. Then silence. When the first satellite images came through, they showed a scene of impossible, localized destruction. A single, surgical hole cut through the outer layers of the prison. Not an explosion. A void. The heroes who responded found a nightmare. The advanced security systems were corroded, aged into obsolescence. The automated defense turrets were piles of rust. The guards in the intersections were not dead, but they were diminished. They were pale, weak, their minds clouded with an unshakable apathy, as if their very will to live had been siphoned away. And in the heart of the prison, all for one cell was empty. But he hadn't just escaped. He had taken others with him. The security logs, corrupted as they were, showed that the cells of a few select, high-level villains had also been breached. Not the most powerful ones, like Gigantomachia, who was too large and conspicuous. But the most cunning. The most fanatical, Lady Nagant, the Commission's fallen sniper. Muscular, the blood-soaked brawler. And Stain, the hero killer, whose ideology had already poisoned a generation. The world reacted with predictable panic. The news broke, and a fresh wave of terror, deeper and more potent than any before, washed over Japan. The invincibility of Tartarus had been a cornerstone of the public's fragile sense of security. With that cornerstone shattered, the entire structure of Heroes society threatened to collapse into dust. For Deku and the students of Class 1A, the news came from a grim-faced Mr. Aizawa, who gathered them in the common room. The television behind him showed looping, grainy footage of the hole in Tartarus, a perfect black circle against the gray concrete. All for one has escaped, Aizawa said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. He did not act alone. He has freed a handful of his most dangerous followers. The room was silent, the air thick with shock and dread. Bakugo clenched his fists so hard his knuckles turned white. Uraraka's face was pale. Todoroki's expression was a mask of cold fury. How? Kirishima asked, his voice strained. Tartarus is supposed to be impossible to break out of. We don't know, Aizawa admitted, his eyes lingering on Deku for a fraction of a second too long. The nature of the breach is unlike anything we've ever seen. The Commission is calling it a new quirk, but the analysis is inconclusive. It defies physics. Deku knew. He knew it wasn't a quirk. It was the power to unmake. He could feel the lingering chill of it even now, a faint echo in the world. He felt a profound, isolating guilt. This was his fault. This was the opening salvo in his war, and the first casualties were the peace and security of the entire nation. All Might found him later, on the balcony of his room, staring out into the night. The older hero looked more worn than ever, as if the news of his nemesis's return had physically drained what little strength he had left. I should have been there, All Might said, his voice a hollow whisper. If I had it lost. If I still had one for all. This isn't about one for all anymore, Deku said, his voice quiet but firm. He couldn't tell him everything, but he had to give him something. He couldn't let his mentor crumble under this misplaced guilt. The power he used, it wasn't a quirk. It was something else. Something more. All Might looked at him, his sunken eyes searching Deku's face. The same something that gave you that gauntlet? Deku hesitated, then gave a slow, somber nod. It's a war, All Might. A bigger one than we ever knew. And he's on the other side now. A grim understanding dawned on All Might's face. He didn't understand the specifics, the gods, the cosmic struggle, but he understood the core of it. His nemesis had ascended, just as his successor had. The old rules no longer applied. Meanwhile, in a hidden, crumbling cathedral on the outskirts of Kamino Ward, the herald of Nihil addressed his new acolytes. All for one stood before them, a figure of absolute dread. The black, necrotic energy of the void coiled around him like a cloak. Lady Nagant, muscular, and Stain stood before him, their expressions a mixture of awe, confusion, and fear. He had not just freed them. He had changed them. He had reached into them with his new power, and planted a seed of the void. Lady Nagant's rifle was no longer just a part of her arm. It was a gnarled, cancerous growth of black, organic-looking material. The bullets she could form were no longer just hair. They were solidified slivers of despair that could induce terror in those she targeted. Muscular's muscle fibers were now threaded with a dark, pulsating energy. He wasn't just strong anymore. His very presence seemed to drain the strength and stamina from his opponents. Stain was the most changed. The hero killer, a man driven by a twisted but rigid ideology, had been exposed to a concept that transcended ideology: pure, unadulterated annihilation. His eyes, once burning with fanatical conviction, now held the chilling emptiness of the void. His knives left wounds that didn't just bleed, they seemed to rot, to resist healing, to spread a creeping decay. "You are wondering why I chose you?" All for One's voice hissed, sucking the warmth from the cavernous space. "You are not merely my lieutenants. You are my first sermon. Each of you represents a crack in the foundation of this pathetic hero's society." He gestured a desiccated hand toward Lady Nagant. "You represent the lie of the system. The hero who saw the hypocrisy and was cast out for it." He turned to Muscular. "You represent the pure, simple truth that might makes right, a truth heroes desperately try to deny." His gaze fell last on Stain. "And you are the most potent of all. You represent the failure of their ideals. You showed the world that their symbols were hollow, creating a vacuum of faith, a vacuum that I am now prepared to fill." He raised his hands, the black energy swirling around him. "Go. Do not seek to conquer. Do not seek to rule. Simply unravel. Spread chaos. Break their toys. Weaken their resolve. Show them that their walls cannot protect them, their heroes cannot save them, and their hope is a lie." He paused, a dark, terrible smile playing on the ruined lips beneath his mask. "The age of heroes is over," the Herald of Nihil declared. "The age of silence has begun."